launch vehicle do you use? When do you launch? Sort of mission concepts we develop. How much is going to cost? There's a lot of key decisions. For this panel, though, I think we want to focus on one key decision that's already been made. And that was the signing of Space Policy Directive 1 by the President last December that directs NASA to return humans to Moon on the way to Mars. So the good news for those who are Mars exploration advocates is that it is directly in national space policy for humans to go to Mars at some point in the future. The bad news is if you want to go directly to Mars, you now have to first go through the Moon. And the question is, does that risk deferring, delaying, even diverting attention away from Mars in the long run? So we've got a panel here of experts from government and industry who are going to talk a little bit about it. We build this as a conversation so that while I do have some questions, I want to encourage conversation among the panel, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time towards the end for some audience Q&A, keeping in mind that we only have about half an hour. I'm going to start with Thomas Lucan, who is the Associate Administrator for the Science Mission Directorate at NASA. He is in charge of all of NASA's science projects, from Earth science to the study of the distant universe, and of course missions to Mars. And congratulations on the successful InSight launch on Saturday, as we saw the video a little earlier this morning. Thomas, NASA rolled out this concept called the Exploration Campaign a few months ago as part of the budget. And it includes a lot of things like the formerly Deep Space Gateway, now the Lunar Orbital Platform Gateway, small commercial lunar landers, development of larger landers. Where does Mars exploration fit into the exploration campaign?
So you, of course, referred to Space Policy Directive 1, and you realize that there's important characteristics that are in there that apply to both lunar and Mars exploration, and they are that the way the policy directive asks us to do that is to do it in partnership. Do it in partnership both with commercial and international partners. You see, this morning, just before I came here, I kicked off an event over at NASA headquarters focused on commercial partnerships to get payloads to the surface of the Moon. So what we're trying to do in this initiative that is directed towards the Moon and Mars is to really, as a first priority, get out of low Earth orbit. I mean, to me, no matter where you want to go, I actually think that's a really important step to do that. To do that movement away from low Earth orbit in partnership with both commercial and international partners in a way that sustainability is achieved. The word sustainable is actually really critical. And so what are we going to do in each one of those cases? We're actually using the speed and the excitement and the very natural behavior of the commercial entities to drive fast ahead. We're doing that right now with Lunar, but you already are aware of the fact that actually we're having similar discussions in the Mars type of environment. We also, of course, are then really building the infrastructure together with our commercials and where appropriate within NASA and with our international partners to actually bring humans out there for long duration. We have to learn how to do this and do it in a way that has the appropriate levels of safety and the appropriate level of knowledge. So yes, are we directed towards Mars? You know, we have a proof point this last weekend. Somebody referred to it as the best launch they ever heard. And I can tell you, just this morning, I looked at all the health data and everything looks great, including, you didn't refer to it earlier, the two small satellites that are out there are becoming the first interstellar CubeSats, interplanetary, that is, CubeSats, interstellar is a little ways out. The interplanetary CubeSats that are there to actually help communication.
Great. Peter McGrath is Director of Business Development for Boeing Space Exploration, been involved in a lot of the company's efforts to develop its concepts for a path to Mars, as we can see up here on the stage. Peter, with this new Space Policy Directorate, how does this affect Boeing's vision of doing humans to eventually to Mars via the Moon?
So I would say it really hasn't changed. Actually, I was going to pull up a slide if you want to pull it up. It's actually one that was on the top left in Joe Cassidy's booth. And really the only thing that really shifted in the philosophy was when we were looking at the architecture before, NASA talked about going to the surface of the moon is going to be either done by international partners or commercial entities. And I'd argue that really hasn't changed. There is a government push to go there, and we talk about commercial landers, maybe the government payloads. So it really hasn't changed much. The real key to this is really looking at an architecture that is sustainable. And I like that word because the concern is if we really vector ourselves to the moon and somebody says, hey, I want to get to the moon quickly, we're going to go direct to the moon and we're going to do something like Apollo. We'll fly 6 missions to the surface of the moon and we'll be done. So whatever we do in terms of the architecture, we ought to set it up in a way that is always extending ourselves further in the solar system, and also it's developing technologies that we're going to use as we go forward. Right? And if you look at it today, NASA, and we're working with NASA and our other industry partners on building the initial capabilities that are going to take us deeper in space with SLS and Orion. And then there's a lot of talk about the gateway. And I see the gateway as kind of that key element that allows you to be sustainable. Because it's from that gateway that we're going to build as an industry team with NASA, and an international partners. I would say that gateway is not going to be a U.S. funded element, it's going to be an internationally funded element. But from there, you can do sample return missions to the surface of the moon. You can do telerobotic missions, which helps you do some demonstrations for things you might be around Mars at some point. And, you can actually use it as a staging point for human missions to the surface of the moon with reusable assets. So it really creates more of a sustainable architecture than just going direct there. And it's a great proving ground for a lot of technologies we want to do outside the Van Allen belt. I think we talked about radiation earlier. It gets you out into deep space and you actually get a look at human health factors and other things. And it's going to be a good staging point to go to Mars. So we're actively involved working with NASA on those things, and as it kind of shows, the architecture really hasn't changed much from what we were looking at before the new directorate.
Eric Stillman, President of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, an organization of dozens of companies and other groups involved in the commercial space industry. How do these companies fit into this new space policy direction?
I think they play a critical component and an ever-growing component to future exploration missions, whether it be to just low Earth orbit, the space station, moon, and Mars, and beyond moon and Mars. So it's a pretty exciting time for the space industry as we all see the rapid growth, from not just the launch perspective, but from the miniaturization of technology and the innovation that's going on, and the reduction of cost access to space. And I think that's one of the most critical components that we're seeing. So we're very enthusiastic about the direction that the White House is going with their mission statement that they have. We think the moon is a very, very viable business plan for many companies. I think the partnership with NASA that the commercial industry has had, carried over from Lightfoot to now the Ministry of Afghanistan. That it's not an or proposition, it's certainly an and proposition. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So we're pretty inspired by the work, not just from the administration, but on down to the National Space Council, what their vision is. It's a sound vision, and as we just heard from Congressman Perlmutter just a moment ago, you really have a good bipartisan spirit too in the Congress to help push a lot of these initiatives along. Congressman Perlmutter was one of the chief advocates for Congressman Brian Sanders, the Democratic caucus, to get him into office. So it's a very exciting time. And I think the commercial industry is playing a tremendous role now in terms of increase.
You mentioned, and Thomas also mentioned, this commercial lunar payload services concept program. And there's an industry day actually going on at the headquarters right now about that. Does that serve as a model for other approaches to bring in more commercial, non-traditional players that could more directly support Mars exploration?
I think so. Look, to me, before coming to NASA, I was part of a venture fund. So the way I'm pattern matching this is really as a partnership with venture funded companies, right? So for me, it's a hypothesis, right? My hypothesis is the hypothesis that we put forward is that with the appropriate kind of partnership, kind of a service model, without stifling with contract language and so forth these new partners, new potential partners, and in some cases, by the way, partners that have already been around for a while but are trying to address. The hypothesis is that we can do things faster and for lower cost than we otherwise would do if we did it, when the trip was kind of hour-long way and it's a hypothesis. So let's figure out what happens. We will know in 2 to 3 years whether the hypothesis bears fruit. Make no mistake, I do not expect that every one of those payloads will be successful. To me, my hope is it's not 0% success. 0% success will be we never take off, by the way. To me, we want to go take off. 100% success is also not what we're aspiring to. Because if that's what we did, we would have to go a lot slower. We want to be there in 19 to 20, at the surface of the moon. For me, if that model works, yes, we want to use it in other places too. You should not be surprised if we come and ask, the industrial segment about similar type of collaborations in the context of Mars as we go forward, for example, with Mars sample return or otherwise. This is a type of model that we really want to tap into and learn. Others have done this before. If we learn anything from commercial cargo, and is how powerful that kind of model can be under certain circumstances. Of course, the story is always more complicated than a typical.
But just to touch on what Thomas said there, I think the venture model is a great model to look at. Certainly, in the Silicon Valley model is 1 in 10 will succeed. If they have one success out of 10 companies they invest in, they consider that success. I wouldn't think NASA would consider that success, but I think a 5 out of 10 ratio, those are Hall of Fame numbers. So I think if you have those kind of venture programs that have success, and I think you're seeing this as Thomas touched on the commercial crew program, or commercial cargo program, the tremendous success and cost savings that we've seen on that, and the innovation that we've derived from those programs. So I think that it's a good program. I think it's a good way to go. I think there's a lot of opportunity for commercial in that aspect.
Yeah, I was just going to comment, the analogy I was thinking of is more like the launch service. It's very much like, bring me a payload, I'll go integrate it into my rocket, I'll fly my rocket. Right? So land is not much different than a standard launch service. A little more complicated because you got to go land on the moon. So you've got a higher risk posture when you have a launch business, but it's not a different analogy from that.
You talked about developing this infrastructure at the moon, with the gateway and landers and so on. At what point do we know it's time to move on to Mars?
That's a good question, and we were kind of talking backstage about, is there enough money to get to Mars? And I think the answer is yes. The question is, how much time and money are we going to spend on the moon, and that just means how much longer is it going to take to get to Mars. And so the question is, what technologies do you really want to prove out in the proving grounds of cislunar space and around the surface of the moon? I would say cislunar space, we're going to do things around like power propulsion element, which is going to give us some high solar electric propulsion technology development that we're going to probably use to look at systems that will take us further out towards Mars. The human factors is a big deal. Psychological effects of living further from home for longer durations. Radiation effects on the body outside the Van Allen belt, we talked about that. Those can be done relatively, I think, quickly within certain mission things. Environmental control systems is one that's a big concern. I made this comment last week at a conference, when we did the EPA system for space station, it worked great on the ground. We took it up to space station, it didn't work so well. And we've been continually tinkering and fixing and repairing, and it kind of needs a lot of hand-touch labor. And we need to get to a point where it's a little more autonomous, work more. To me, that's the one I know we're spending a lot of time on station right now working at. And I know we're going to send something out to the gateway to demonstrate it. When you get down to the surface, though, ascent and descent aren't really the same on the moon as it is Mars. It's probably better to do that here in the Earth system than it is out around the moon. But you can put out some subsystems on it. The question is, do you want to get down to surface systems? Because you can definitely demonstrate surface systems for Mars on the moon. but that's going to take a lot of time and money. You know, and ISRU is the other big one, right? You know, how do we get there's a lot of talk about technology, about mining things off the moon, but we haven't really validated we can do it, and we haven't determined whether it makes sense to do it. And so doing some of that experiment is probably a good thing to do on the moon. But you can do a lot of that robotically. I don't have to send humans down to do a lot of that. So maybe that's a long answer to your question, but you know, I think there's a lot of things we can do in the moon vicinity and on the moon to help us. The key is take more of a minimalist view versus trying to prove everything out. Pick the key things you want to go do, and then let's move on to Mars. And back to your commercial point, if it shows that there's promise, commercial will follow and pick that up. You don't have to do it all as a government at that point. Let the commercial, kind of like commercial twin cargo, let it kind of follow behind the government.
Eric, do you see that sort of transition?
I see it a little differently, but in a similar vein. I think the moon, you know, will be used as long as people see a viable resources there and business plan and whatever they want to be doing on the moon. But I think also it's not exclusively the stepping stone. I think if there's commercial vehicles and opportunities available to Mars, it could bypass what the moon, bypass the moon aspect of it. So, you know, we're seeing two new generation launch vehicles, the BFR and Blue Origin's next generation launch vehicle, that they just may bypass and have an opportunity for a Mars mission. And it doesn't have to wait on NASA. It can partner with NASA, or it could do it on its own. So I think it's a two-pronged approach, perhaps. You know, where you can moon as long as the moon is viable. Once we get settlements on the moon and commerce on the moon, I think that will be fully operational. But I think bypass that with Mars as soon as possible.
Thomas, one of the things that Joe Cassidy mentioned in the report this morning was the importance of Mars sample return, both from a scientific standpoint on a standalone basis, but also as a precursor developing technologies and learning skills for later missions there. We've got the Mars 2020 rover under construction. What does the future for Mars sample return look like beyond Mars 2020?
You saw in the budget proposal for 2019 is a specific mention of Mars sample return in the late 20s, and directing us to start studying that. And the way we want to do that is precisely the way we just talked about, in the spirit. Namely, we're not going to do this in isolation. We're going to do it in partnership of organizations around. It may, for example, be that under certain circumstances there may be possibilities of buying commercial services for communications, for example, in orbit. It may be that there's launch capabilities that's available for us that, for example, 5 years ago were not there. But we have every commitment to do that. These kind of analysis, that's what we're spending time on right now. What we're doing internally is working with a couple companies to actually look at really the propulsion side of this question, which is how do we take off? So first of all, suppose we land an ascent vehicle. How do we survive there during the night when it's cold and kind of autonomously? And how do we flip the switch from somewhere else and take off reliably into orbit around about Mars, right? And so for us, it's really a technology development, at the same time really looking at potential partnerships that makes this a campaign to get Mars samples back, because we want the best labs on Earth to analyze these samples for the science reasons that you flagged, just because, irrespective of where these labs are, and that's how we want to set it up.
Got one more question I want to ask each of the panelists, and I'll open it up. Probably should have a few minutes for audience Q&A, so if you want to start queuing up to the mics, this is a good time to do it. In the previous panel, Congressman Perlmutter talked about humans to Mars in 2033, about setting a goal and sort of crystallize what might otherwise be an amorphous humans to Mars effort. Is 2033 realistic from a technical, fiscal, programmatic, other standpoint, in your opinions? Is there a better date, or is there in fact a need for it?
Yeah, I don't like to get locked into dates. We're being in the commercial aspect, commercial side of the house. We've put dates out there for suborbital and for different launch vehicles, and they tend to push to the right a little bit from time to time. always happy when they push to the left. To fix a date is challenging in itself, but I think what it's going to take is more what you're saying on the sound policies and funding. And how we spend our money today is what's really going to help enable us, whether it's 2033 or 2027 or 2040, God forbid. So I think the way NASA spends their money, I think